Good Monday morning, everyone. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York as we continue to follow this breaking news. Pope Francis has died at 88 years old, just a day after this, when he surprised well-wishers on Easter Sunday. He appeared on a balcony over St. Peter's Basilica. Francis was the first Latin American pontiff from Argentina, and this pope was known as relatively progressive compared to his contemporaries and the church overall. Let's begin to digest this news with John Allen. He's the editor of Crux, an outlet that covers the Vatican and the Catholic Church. John, wonderful to have you at this moment. We're listening to the bells chiming there in Vatican City, one for each year of the Pope's life. I'm just wondering for you what this moment feels like, especially as we hear these bells.
Hi there. Good morning, Errol. Well, you know, I'm struck by the fact that today is what the Italians call Pasquetta, the Little Easter. It's supposed to be a day of great rejoicing and celebration, but obviously far more bittersweet as we mark the life and the legacy of this incredible, and it has to be said at times, tumultuous Pope. I think the thing I'm struck by more than anything else is how yesterday we were all talking about Francis's triumphant return to St. Peter's Square after that 38-day hospitalization, battling double pneumonia, supposedly under doctor's orders to be on a 2-month lockdown, but yet this irrepressible Pope who lived for contact with the people, especially ordinary people, the forgotten and the marginalized that other titans of the earth typically overlooked. You know, that was his elan vital, so to speak, and he craved that contact, and yesterday he had it once again. I have to think that if Pope Francis were to choose a moment to make his exit, he couldn't have scripted this any better, Errol.
And so in what ways, John, has the behavior of Pope Francis during his last month or so also bucked tradition and trend? Because to some extent you could say that is a characterization of his papacy. But in what other ways over the past few months did we see the Pope break with norms?
Well, you know, to paraphrase Frank Sinatra, this was a Pope who always did it his way. And even over these recent weeks, we have seen that. Remember that when he left Rome's Gemelli Hospital after that fight with double pneumonia, his doctors made a point during the press conference when he was dismissed from the hospital of saying he needed to be in a strict convalescence for at least 2 months. That is, no public appearances, no contact with people outside his inner circle. And yet, repeatedly, we have seen him breaking into that. We saw him recently, for example, going into St. Peter's Square, being wheeled in a wheelchair by his personal nurse, wearing a simple poncho and a pair of pants like an ordinary guy, wanting to go pray before a statue of St. Pius X, one of his predecessors to whom he is especially close. And then, of course, yesterday we saw him there in the central loggia of St. Peter's Basilica, that very spot where he accepted the papacy 12 years ago, imparting the traditional Urbi et Orbi blessing to the city and to the world for Easter Sunday, and then making that triumphant swing in the Pope-mobile through the crowd, stopping periodically to greet young people and ordinary visitors to St. Peter's Square who, under any other circumstances, would never have access to a Pope. But as I said, this is a Pope for whom those ordinary people, those were his folks. That was his crowd. And so to have that opportunity one last time before he went home to the Lord, one has to think that that filled this 88-year-old pontiff's heart with a special kind of joy, Errol.
Really incredible perspective there, John. And I'm wondering if you can better contextualize his papacy. This is a day when, you know, the world's more than 1.3 billion Catholics will mourn and look back, while they will note some of the progress he made in modernizing the church. There were limits. There was tradition that the Pope was up against. How do you feel that most will remember the Pope and his efforts to bring people together?
Well, I mean, as you say, today is obviously a day of mourning where the Catholic instinct is to want to commend the soul of someone who has died into the arms of a loving and merciful God. But, you know, going forward, you are absolutely right. There is going to be a vigorous debate about this pontificate, because Pope Francis was not only beloved, he was also a lightning rod. He was a source of controversy continually for these 12 years. In some ways, he was a roller coaster ride of a pope. And, you know, there will be those, some on the Catholic right will argue that he bucked with tradition too much. And they will be hoping for whoever his successor may be to be a more conventional figure. Others on the Catholic left will like the inclusive tonality of this papacy, but say that substantively it didn't go far enough. Some reformers, particularly, for instance, on issues that have bedeviled the Catholic Church in recent years, I am thinking in particular of the clerical sexual abuse scandals and also the chronic financial scandals in Catholicism, will say that while Francis launched some ambitious reforms, they remain very much a work in progress. And there's a great deal sitting on the desk for his successor to pick up. As I say, that is a discussion that is going to gather steam as the initial shock of the Pope's passing sort of subsides. But I think that's not so much today's conversation, Errol. I think today's conversation is simply sort of taking a breath and taking stock of this remarkable figure who stood on the global stage like no other for these past 12 years and defied convention, defied expectations from the very beginning to the very end. I mean, as Nora Roberts noted in her brilliant opening to our discussion, he began those very first moments in St. Peter's over my shoulder by kneeling and asking the crowd in the square to bless him before he imparted his blessing on them, something no pope had ever done. And then in the immediate hours afterwards, he went back to the clerical residence where he had been staying before the conclave in order to pack his own bag and pay his own bill, something we had never seen before. He announced he wouldn't be living in the papal apartments and instead was going to live in this residence on Vatican grounds, the Casa Santa Marta, something we had never seen before. And that do-it-my-way ethos continued throughout these 12 years. To the very end, where despite doctor's orders, and some would argue despite common sense, he simply could not be stopped from making himself present to the people he loved so much. I mean, you know, we talk about a life richly lived. I think if ever we have seen one, Pope Francis showed us how it's done.
Remarkable, John. A summary there of Pope Francis's life with a citation from Frank Sinatra even. But really to underscore how Pope Francis did his best, it seems, to leave his mark on the Catholic Church. John Allen, thank you so much for that.